Welcome everybody to our Launch Legumes Pollinator Plantings project webinar for the fall 2025 cohort. We're glad you're all here to learn about the step-by-step process from planning your project to taking care of it for long-term success. We'll be going over a few of the project types in more detail, including pocket plantings, trees and shrubs, and also container plantings, rain gardens, and pollinator meadows. If you're planning on doing a pollinator lawn project, we have a separate webinar for that next Monday, so stay tuned for that. So tonight, we'll be starting with our presentation portion, and then with our remaining time at the end, we'll have time for a short Q&A session. Please use the chat this time to put your questions in. We have a couple of our staff members who will be monitoring that, and then anything unanswered we'll try to get to at the end. And this webinar will be recorded and emailed to everyone afterwards if you're not able to stay the whole time. So my name is Megan. I am on the education team here at Metro Blooms and Blue Thumb. We also have Alexandra on our education team who will be in the chat tonight. And we're really grateful to have two Metro Blooms Design Build landscape designers here with us, Rich and Jen, who will be doing our presenting. So I'm going to pass it to both of you, Jen and Rich, to introduce yourselves and get us started here.
Great. I'll start off. Rich Harrison, co-director of design, and been with Metro Blooms for 13-ish years, and I'm excited to share some of my knowledge with you all.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here with you tonight. I'm Jen Ehlert, also landscape architect working with Metro Blooms Design and Build, and really enjoy giving our Lawns to Legumes presentation. So we're excited to share a lot of really good information with you this evening.
All right, I'll start off the first segment, and we're going to be focusing on site assessment. And, I would recommend making a base map of your property and starting from there. If you look at this image, you'll see this was a hand-drawn base map, and some folks have challenges doing that, and I would recommend going to getting an aerial photo from your county GIS website. And every single county has a little bit of a different geographic information system. But if you just Googled your county name and then GIS, hopefully you'll be able to find it. And on that, you'll be able to look for layers where you can turn on an aerial photo. And this is actually kind of cool because you can sometimes see multiple aerial photos from different years. And I like to recommend going to this site because a lot of times the aerial photos are taken before the leaves pop out on deciduous trees. And so it allows you to see some of the landscape below those trees in the spring or before leaf out. So that's a good way. Some people do have surveys, or you might be able to draw it from Google Maps, or just draw it by hand. Yeah. So when you do this drawing, here's a very simple one that was done from a site in Minneapolis. Draw your house, your garage, your walks, patio, any impervious structures, driveways. And think about also the public road and other major structures like fences and walls. Sometimes there's lighting in there, and let's not forget utilities. You might not know exactly where your underground utilities are, and you can call Gopher State 1 to have them marked. But you're going to want to show where those are. Oftentimes, if you have a detached garage or like a shed or something that has power, um, the Gopher State one will not mark private utilities. So just make note of that. And like on this drawing here, you'll see a little red line that goes from the house to the garage. And just a little pro tip, if you see a little conduit sticking out of your structure of your garage, oftentimes it's a straight line to your house, but not always. So, but it's important to know where those utilities are because it might impact where you would put trees, shrubs, and rain gardens, if that's the case, where you're going to put in your project. Um, the other thing that was shown in that, and you can stay on this slide because it's shown here too. So yeah, the next slide's fine. Is the roof line of your house. And this is important if you're thinking about adding rain gardens onto your property, because there is a formula for doing a rain garden and understanding the square footage of your roof. So on this, this is all about hydrology, and that is how stormwater flows across your property. And I like to denote where there's high points on your landscape and low points, and arrows that show the direction that water is flowing off your landscape. Another thing on here is a DS for downspouts, and it's good to mark where those are, and again where they're draining to. And this is important, especially if you're considering adding rain gardens to your property, which I'll talk about later. Also, you'll see here that we put the neighbors' houses on there. And in some cases, when you're dealing with hydrology and stormwater management, water might be coming from your neighbor's property. So you'll want to mark that. And then lastly, on this, we are showing in this case there's pooling water right by the garage door or the walk that goes to the alley in this property. So if you have pooling water, you might want to mark that and show that on your plan, and that'll help inform you of how you might address that later on. Okay. The next step is identifying existing vegetation. And the first thing that I would mark is where the trees are, where there's existing trees. And just don't mark just where the trunk is. Try to draw an approximate line of where the canopy extent is. And this will impact, of course, what types of plants you might put underneath that tree. And again, if you're placing rain gardens, we want to avoid putting them directly under trees, especially close to the trunk. And also in this drawing, you'll see that we used a different color. And so in this case, we're using red to show those existing planting beds. And you might want to identify some vegetation within those, and especially stuff that you want to keep that you know is high value. So just identifying that existing vegetation is important. Okay. Let's talk about light. We're going to talk about it again later, but understanding where your shade patterns are and where you have direct sunlight and how that changes over time. That'll impact how you might use your yard. If you're going to have like a vegetable garden or areas of play where you might want to be in the shade from trees, but also it's definitely going to impact what types of plants you're going to use. And Jen is going to talk about that later. But you're going to want to just take note as to where those sunny spots are and where those part shade and shade areas are. And on this slide, you'll also see a image of the plant finder tool. And this is on the Blue Thumb website. It's a fantastic resource that I would encourage you all to explore. And one of the features is the light exposure for your property. And again, that impacts, of course, what you observe. So, okay. So the last step here is brainstorming. And I'm going to talk about functional use of your landscape and how do you use it? How do you walk through it? How do you play on it? And take note of that. Sometimes I'll use a highlighter marker on my plan, and I'll draw where you're walking. And you know, my real quick statement is, like, if the only reason why you're walking on your lawn is to mow it, you might want to consider reducing the amount of lawn that you have, especially around the edges or around the foundation. Um, and thinking about that. So brainstorm how you think you're going to use your yard in the future, because sometimes those things change if you have kids or grandkids, or families, and that's something to think about. And then, of course, think about the aesthetics. And I'm not anti-lawn by any means. I love walking on a freshly mowed lawn with my bare feet, and playing in it, but I don't understand why we need to have so much of it. And so, thinking about that aesthetics and what you're thinking. And then lastly, like that stormwater management, here's the other piece. Back to hydrology. If you've got concentrated stormwater flow across and away from your property, then consider incorporating a rain garden into that landscape. I'll talk about rain gardens later, but oftentimes rain gardens are incorporated into a much larger landscape bed, later on, all in time. Sometimes we don't have the resources to do it all at once, but this is a place where you want to imagine what your yard could be, in the long run, as you plug away at projects over the years. This is an example of a project where there was actual stormwater running off of a large driveway and parking area. And, in this case, they just put a very shallow rain garden. This is a picture right after it was installed. But the intent here is to slow that water down and let it soak into the ground and prevent it from running off of the property, and reducing the amount of stormwater runoff that otherwise pollutes the receiving water body downstream. So this is a really, really nice example of a small, manageable project. It's only 165 square feet. And that's my last word of advice right up front is, don't be overwhelmed, and think small. You might just be getting started, and so we don't need to do it all at once. And so this is a really good example of that. Jen?
Thanks, Rich. Hi, everybody. That's such a great introduction and such a really helpful set of slides. So that as you're thinking about planning your lawns to legumes project, you can really take all of those things into consideration, so you develop a project that ultimately really works for you and for your space. And we, again, to echo what Rich said, really encourage you to kind of do a little bit of that planning, because then you can jump into the fun part and the selection of native plants, but it'll just ensure that you find the right place for your project. So we're going to talk next about what makes native plants so resilient. I imagine you all probably know a little bit about this because you are Lawns to Legumes applicants and have some excitement about native plants. But we'll just kind of dive into that a little bit more and reinforce what you already know about native plants. Of course, they're well adapted to our environment. They're native to this area. But what is so beneficial about them is that they also have very, very deep roots. Those deep roots, which are kind of originated in helping us have such really rich prairie soil, those deep roots can reach water that is much lower in the soil profile. So we've been having a pretty wet year so far, but if you all can remember back to last fall, it was actually quite dry. And a lot of native plants were way more resilient at that time because those deep roots could access water that was deeper in the soil profile during these just really unusual seasons that we have that could be really dry, could be really wet. They're going to be really resilient for that. They can also tolerate our harsh winters. So if we have a really cold snap, that can really help these plants survive as those roots being deeper into the soil. And they're also not requiring inputs. They require less water. They do need some to get established. That's really important, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But you don't need to be fertilizing them. You don't need to be mowing them. So the inputs that they need are less, and that also increases their resiliency. This is just to show you a little bit more about how the roots of native plants re-engineer the soil. And I think this is so cool. One of the issues that we have in urban areas is that soil compaction is a real barrier to plants growing well in the soil. And that just happens from years and years of people walking over soil, cars driving on it, things like that. And the roots of native plants can really begin to change that. So what's cool about it is that about every winter, about a third of a plant's roots will begin to die off. So if you remember that image from the previous slide of those really, really deep native plant roots, if some of those die off a little bit, then you're really creating these channels for rainwater to get deeper into the soil. That's one of the stacked ecological benefits of native plants, is that if you use them in spaces where you're capturing stormwater runoff, like rain gardens that Rich mentioned, and we'll talk more about later, then actually those deep roots can help that runoff water get deeper into our soil profile, where it gets cleaned, cooled before it enters our waterways, our streams, and our lakes and rivers. Also, native plants can provide pollinator protection. So they are providing overwintering sites for our native pollinators. And then it really helps to, I'd say like just all around beautify our community. I've been really enjoying this time of year, driving around, seeing a lot of coneflower blooming, a lot of liatris blooming. And I think there's just quite a bit of stacked benefits to these native plants that you can begin to see. And once you start to recognize them and drive through your community. One way that you can help with the soil compaction that I mentioned just a couple of minutes ago is really improving soil health. So if you have some compacted soil, what I would recommend is to decompact that with a shovel. We actually are not recommending that you rototill your soil to start these projects. Rototilling can actually pulverize the soil to such a degree that any existing soil fungal networks are debilitated and really can't grow back. And those soil fungal networks are really what help a lot of plants survive and soil clump together. So if you know that you have a site, say a boulevard in an urban area that's pretty compacted, what you want to do is really just use a shovel to turn and loosen that soil into big chunks. You don't have to have it be really finely ground up like a rototiller would do. And then add some compost, add some organic matter. We really like leaf compost as opposed to manure compost. Manure can have very, very high levels of nitrogen and isn't quite necessary. So an organic leaf compost, mushroom compost, something like that would be perfect. And just sort of turn that into the shovel and rake that smooth. That gives the baby plants that you put in the ground a little bit of an uncompacted area to really start to grow and get kind of their best start. And then those roots will begin to re-engineer the soil over time as they grow deeper and deeper, like you saw in that previous slide. The other thing that's really important is that you do keep your soil covered and really don't disturb it much once you've planted it. Part of the reason is that if you have bare soil and we get a really heavy rain event like we did here in Minneapolis last night, those heavy raindrops actually compact the soil quite a bit. So having some type of shredded leaf mulch, double shredded hardwood mulch, like you can see in this photo on the bottom right, is going to help cover that soil and protect it, keep it from washing away, and then also keep it from recompacting in a heavy rain. We don't think that you need to remulch your projects every year and just add a ton of wood mulch. We're just really recommending that you start with that double shredded hardwood mulch in the beginning in order to help protect those growing plants. When you have these little baby plants and lots of space between them, you want to make sure that that space between them doesn't get washed away or colonized by weeds. And this is really going to help hold moisture in the soil, cool the soil, and keep it stable while your new plants are getting established. Just a quick note about mulch is that you really want a mulch that is shredded because it tends to mat down and stay in place. If you use a mulch that looks chipped or looks like it just came off a 2x4, so that very light and colored chipped mulch, that tends to wash away really easily, and we find that that can be detrimental down the road. So really shredded mulch is going to help hold the soil in place and give your plants the best chance to get started. Another thing for you to consider as you're determining where to put your new plantings are sunlight. Rich talked about this, and this slide just goes into that in just a little bit more detail, really defining for you what full sun, part sun, and then full shade means. The biggest question we get, especially if you're in an urban area where maybe you have other buildings that are providing shade throughout the year or throughout the day, is that you might have a lot of shade in the morning, but you really have kind of from 1 to 4 p.m. Excuse me, you've got full sun. If that's the case, I would consider that really a part sun, part shade site. It really only gets 3 hours of sunlight, but it gets that hot afternoon sun. So putting full shade plants into that area wouldn't really work very well because the intensity of the light is so high in the afternoon. So just a note about that. Again, full sun is more than 6 hours of direct sun. Part sun, part shade is 3 to 6 hours, kind of that middle ground. And then full shade is less than 3 hours of sun. But again, if you have just hot afternoon sun, I would kind of bump it up to the part sun category. If you guys end up having questions about that, please do put those in the chat and we're happy to clarify. Soil moisture is also really important for where you're when you're picking out your plants for your new project. I would really encourage you to just dig in the soil, see what's going on. This is a great year to do that. You'll learn if you have heavy soils, if they are remaining saturated after all these rain events we've been having. You'll be able to determine if, okay, maybe I have some heavy soil that's really holding a lot of moisture and staying really wet. If you are planning to install a rain garden and to be able to use your Lawns to Legumes grant for the plants that are in the rain garden, it's good to find plants that can handle both wet and dry conditions. Rain gardens are not meant to hold moisture and be wet all the time like a pond. They are meant to hold moisture during a rain event and then let it soak into the soil. So if we have a drought, that soil is actually going to be quite dry. So we call those plants mesic. They can really handle wet as well as dry conditions. And there's a lot of plant lists and resources available to you as grantees regarding plants for a rain garden. Now, when you're thinking about your design considerations for your project, let's talk a little bit about plant height. That's always very helpful, and a lot of our native plants do grow to a decent height, so you want to do a little bit of planning ahead. If you have walkways, you may want to consider low-growing plants next to the walkway. I love meadow blazing star. You can see it in the photo on the right, and I think this is absolutely beautiful, but those plants are flopping over that walkway. So if that bothers you or is something that you don't want to have happen, you want to do a little bit of planning so you can keep the tall plants a little farther back from places where you might walk or where you might need to mow. There are lots of really wonderful low-growing native plants to use next to a sidewalk, next to an area where you might need to be mowing, such as pussy toes are great for sun, so is prairie smoke, wild strawberry, and geranium. Those can be great for shady sites and really good edge species. However, if you're looking to provide some privacy or you want to use this new planting to provide a little bit of screening, we have some lovely tall native grasses like little blue stem, as well as native species like Joe Pieweed, cup plant, and ironweed, which would do a really nice job for a tall planting if you want to use that to help define your space or, up along a fence line or to provide some privacy. So consider that when you're planning out your project and think about plant height. Now, there are a couple of different design styles that I want to bring your attention to. The one that I really recommend if native plants and some of these species are new to you and you're still learning what they look like is called plant massing. Plant massing is where you group plants into groups of, say, 3, 5, or 7, kind of for increased visual impact. Also, the benefit of that is if you have a grouping of plants spaced really regularly in your garden, and next spring they come up and you're trying to figure out, which is that native plant I put in the ground, or is this a weed? It'll help you because the native plants are all spaced really nicely. You can tell that they were likely planted with intention. And then this one kind of odd one popping up, that's probably a weed. So it can just help you maintain your site a little bit better if you have larger groupings of a single species instead of just one plant here and one plant here. Now, you still do need to provide pollinator benefit throughout the season. So you can have clumps of 3, 5, or 7 throughout your garden. And once they're clumped together like that, you can really help identify that species. It's also really beneficial to pollinators. So if they really feed on a particular plant that you have planted, you have a large grouping of that and it's providing forage for them throughout the season. And again, just don't forget to plant a diversity of species, especially because we're going to want you to have something that's going to bloom again, sort of April through October, sometimes even into November now, to make sure that pollinators are having something to forage on all throughout the growing season. You can do this with shady sites also. I would say that most shady gardens are really defined by their texture. You might see a lot more plant texture as you see in these pictures from an aesthetic perspective than you see flowers. But you can also provide flowers for pollinators in a shade garden throughout the year, and there's some really great plant lists available as well. Shade gardens do tend to have their like moment in the spring. That's because a lot of our shady species are evolved to bloom before the trees leaf out. So those species are tend to bloom early in the spring, and you might have kind of a profusion of flowers in your spring garden. But with a little bit of careful planning, you can use things like zigzag goldenrod, big-leaved aster, to add some fall blooming species to that garden and to be able to extend the bloom time of a shade garden and really provide pollinator benefit all throughout the growing season. The second design style I want to mention to you is called matrix plantings. This is maybe a little bit more of a modern aesthetic to a planting, but it can be really helpful in a really large area. So if you have a really big area you're planting, or even a boulevard. We see this very commonly in urban boulevards because those can be difficult growing environments. You would really use a matrix of primary plants, and those primary plants are usually 1 or 2 grasses and 1 or 2 sedges. And sedges are clumping, but they tend to be they green up earlier in the year, and they like a little bit wetter soil. The grasses can tolerate a little bit of drier soil. So by adding that diversity into your planting, you're automatically having species that can handle a variety of conditions. And then you really intersperse that grass and sedge matrix with some flowering native plants to be able to provide that pollinator benefit. One of the reasons this can be really beneficial is the grasses and sedges tend to grow pretty quickly, and they tend to grow together, so they're really covering the bare soil. When you have any, or not really bare soil, excuse me, bare space between the plants, when you have a new planting that's getting established and you have space between the plants, that is just really the prime time for weeds to come in and be kind of difficult or something for you to manage. So the benefit of this planting is by having those grasses and sedges covering the soil, they're providing a less beneficial growing environment for weeds, and maybe like out competing and elbowing out some of those weedy species to make maintenance easier down the road. So this is a great thing to consider for a boulevard or really a large planted area. Another thing that's beneficial when you're designing your planting is to think about edging. I'm not only talking about that plastic edging that is very common around planting beds. We actually don't recommend using plastic edging. There's a lot of plastics in our soils already, so if you can avoid plastic edging, that would be beneficial. But there's a lot of materials that can be used for edging. The reason edging is very helpful is that it can help you maintain your planting down the road. So if you have bricks, stones, or if you put your planting up against a sidewalk, or if you even just use your weed whip to maintain a cut edge between your turf and your mulched area, that's just going to help you prevent that turf from growing into your planting, to prevent the mulch from spilling out onto the turf. So that, and when you have those kind of like mixed areas, it makes it difficult to maintain that planting in a neat way. So having some type of edging can really help you define, here's where I stop mowing, here's where my plantings are, and it can just help your maintenance down the road. And again, there's so many materials. You can use recycled bricks, recycled building materials, pieces of recycled concrete. There's a lot of really great options for edging. And if you kind of look that up, there's always fun ideas on Pinterest or something like that to really look for fun ideas for edging. There's even aluminum and metal edging that can be placed into the soil. And that's a nice, very clean way to provide edging, prevent turf from growing into your new planting. And then, of course, signage. Signage is a great way to communicate your intent to your neighbors as you're removing your turf and you're starting to do this planting, or maybe you put down cardboard, or you're going to solarize your site and put down some plastic to kill your turf. Your neighbors just really don't know what you're doing. This is a great way to get your intent shared with your neighbors. You can talk about it. It's a great conversation starter. Also a great way to let other people know about native plants and the benefits of native plants. So consider some signage. And I believe you do get a Lawns to Legumes yard sign with your project. And so I would encourage you to display that as well. All right, I'm going to jump into some of the different project types as part of Lawns to Legumes. I'm going to start with pocket plantings, and then Rich is going to jump in and talk about a couple of the other project types. And Alexandra has confirmed in the chat that yes, you do get a Lawns to Legumes sign after you have submitted for reimbursement. Thanks, Alexandra. So pocket plantings are just a really nice way to start small. If you feel like adding a new garden in this way is a little intimidating, you're not sure about this, this is a great starting point. And there are tons of design templates. Sorry, the word escaped me for a second there. Design templates to make this as easy on you as possible. These are two excellent images of how people have even added, in the right side, added a pocket planting really as a foundation planting, right? So they already had maybe a planting around their house, and they've expanded that and added a pollinator planting in front of it and put this really nice brick or stone edging between the turf and the mulch. Looks great. And then the middle picture here, they're really adding a pocket planting into their turf area. They've got some edging around it. They've got their little sign there. It's really a nice size and can feel very manageable. It's also really something you could add on to in the coming years. So as you begin to learn these plants, maybe in a few years, your plants have grown enough that you can divide them and share them or spread them around in your own yard, then you can add on to that over time. So a couple of things to consider with pocket plantings. You really want to make sure that you're laying out the plants before you put them in the ground so that you're happy with your spacing. It's very easy to start planting and then get all your plants in the ground. You turn around and you realize you have a big space behind you that you meant to space the plants out into. So really set the plants on the ground in their pots over that larger area, and that's going to help you determine, where you want to plant them and make sure you're doing that in the best way possible. Hey, Rich.
Hey, I wanted to add one more thing to this pocket planting, and also something that I completely forgot to mention with this site assessment. And as you're, looking for all these potential projects, and, one question is, where do I start? And this picture here reminded me of, putting it where you're going to see it often. So prioritizing your first project where you're going to see it frequently, so you're more inclined to take more care of it, but then also put it near a water source, ideally closer to a water source, because you are going to need to water these. And I'll talk about watering in a little bit. But I was just thinking about the fact that I forgot to mention, when you start prioritizing your projects, and these little pocket plantings are perfect for starters.
That's such great advice. I totally agree. Absolutely. Put it where you're going to see it and make sure you can water it and make it easier on yourself to maintain it down the road. All right. Just going to talk a little bit about a couple of the design templates so you would know what to expect if you decide to use these for your garden. Now, they all have a little plan with them. You can see it's got some general dimensions. This one is about 8 feet by 11 feet. You can always make adjustments. Maybe yours is crescent shaped. It's not shaped like an oval. That's totally fine. Just think back to some of the tips that I mentioned. Plant height, it's like your family photo. The tall folks are in the back, shorter ones up front. You kind of want to do the same thing with your planting, and then really maintain those plant groupings. As you can see here, there are really groups of 3, groups of 5. That's going to help you, as I mentioned earlier, just maintain your plantings down the road. So a couple of the edge species here, prairie smoke. That's a great edge species. I think we have pussy toes in this one. No, I can't. Sorry, folks. I don't have my glasses on. Can't quite read all the plant names in that list. But some of the taller ones, purple coneflower, that's in the center of this planting. That's going to provide height right in the center. This is 75 square feet. This is a really manageable size to start with. And then we have even larger templates from there. So this one is for a native shade garden. So if you are working with shade, no worries, we got you covered. Native shade garden, this is about 150 square feet. If you're not sure how big that is, 150 divide is just an area calculation. So 10 by 15 is 150 square feet. And that's one way that you can start to think about that in your yard. Some of my favorite shady species, wild geranium probably is one of my absolute favorite shade species. such an easy plant to grow, and you want to make sure you get the native wild geranium. There are several cultivars that are sold, and I know that you all have been provided some educational resources about what cultivars are. That's when you have a plant that's been bred for a specific character trait, and it often has like a little name in quotations. Let's say wild geranium Max Frey. That's a particular cultivar. Those are not eligible for lawns to legumes reimbursement, and you really want to make sure you're selecting the straight native species. So this is a shade garden. It's got wild geranium in the spring, blooming in the spring, but going all through the season, we start to get some zigzag goldenrod in there. That's for fall. Bradbury's Monarda, that's a great mid-season bloomer. And then as you get later into the season, there's some white turtlehead, some great blue lobelia. All of those are going to bloom later into the fall. So you're really providing that pollinator benefit all season long. And there are design templates available to you for almost any possible situation you can have. And we've even created some new ones recently. So you've got a lot to work with. The bottom left template here is really going to be great for a boulevard. That's bright sun and it's low. So it keeps the plants low. If you're in a boulevard, you want to make sure that species are shorter so that you can maintain a visual connection between the sidewalk and the street. There are usually ordinances in whatever municipality that you live in that require that plants in a boulevard be short enough for people to see over. And that's for safety, to make sure that cars can see a kid if they decide to chase a ball into the street. And then a shade garden for pollinators. There are some great ways to incorporate larger plants into a shade garden for pollinators. In the center of this design template here is a pagoda dogwood. That's a really lovely small tree for shade and a great way to add some variety and height and texture in a shade garden. These are our new design templates for lawns to legumes. They were created this spring. So the bottom left one I think is really been valuable. If you have a site where you have a large shade tree, you have some failing turf growing underneath that, well, that's a really great place to put a dry understory for pollinators. There's several reasons why that is helpful. One, just maybe isn't going so well with your turf. It's not being successful. It's being shaded out. It's probably kind of dry because that large tree is soaking up so much water. But another reason is that a lot of our native moth species utilize trees, wrap up in those leaves, especially in winter, and when those moth species then fall, or then those leaves fall and they get mowed. So once they get mowed, that's going to, kill any caterpillars. So having non-mowed spaces underneath trees is really helping to support our moth species. And so that's what this template is showing you, is how to do a clumped design of species that specifically are evolved to be in kind of like a dry woodland area. We'd find a lot of these species in our Minnesota forests in that woodland as that spring ephemeral layer, but we've included some in here that can extend, like big-leaved aster, that can extend that growing season into the fall. So that's a really great template. If you have that situation, I highly encourage you to take a look at that. And then back to the matrix plantings that I mentioned earlier, we're calling this a modern grid planting. That's really that matrix design planting. So this is very helpful and really geared towards maybe even a boulevard situation. And this bottom right template could be for you if that's what you're looking to create. We have a few more templates for boulevards. I do want to acknowledge that boulevards are a very difficult growing environment. That soil is often compacted. There are utilities in a boulevard, so you definitely need to make sure you get those utilities marked, like Rich mentioned earlier. That is where often there's a lot of pet waste, or we need to walk across the boulevard. So I would encourage you, if you are interested in doing a boulevard planting for your Lawns to Legumes project, plan where people are going to walk. So put some stepping stones across it, make sure you're providing access for people to cross the boulevard. But then also consider the species. So there are a few templates that do a really good job of selecting species that grow well in boulevards. Some of my favorites that I think have been really successful include things like Pearly Everlasting. That's one of our native species that is just a little bit salt tolerant. Now, don't go dump a ton of salt on it, but it can handle a little bit if you have to use some salt on your sidewalks to prevent slipping. There's a couple of native grasses like blue grama, prairie dropseed that do really nicely in boulevards. And then a few other species here too. Butterfly weed, which is that beautiful orange flower you see there, as well as purple prairie clover. Both can do really well in that more challenging growing environment of a boulevard. And then Rich, I'll let you talk a little bit about rain gardens and some of our other project types.
Great. Well, that is a load of information, and I would encourage all of you to take advantage of those resources and plant templates that are on the Blue Thumb website. And when you go to those resources page, you'll also find some plant templates for rain gardens. And I had talked about stormwater management in the site assessment, and this is something that I really believe in. And even if you have like a really large yard, where your downspouts are draining to a yard and you feel like there's not a whole lot of stormwater runoff that's leaving your property and going to the street and into the storm drain. The truth is that the root systems of grass is very, very shallow, and there's surprisingly a lot of runoff that occurs from the lawn. And not only that, but if you are fertilizing and mowing frequently, well, fertilizing annually and mowing frequently, then the amount of phosphorus that's coming off of a lawn is very high. And so you want to try to intercept that storm water. And one of the best ways to do that is in a rain garden. So in this image, you'll see, it's really just a shallow depression in the landscape. I always tell people that all rain gardens are just modified perennial beds. And the plants that we use in them are going to be, 2, 3, 4, up 5. If you use Joe Pyeweed, that's like 6, 7 feet tall. And so once the plants are growing up, you really don't even realize that it is a rain garden. But the other thing that rain gardens do is they mitigate those impervious surfaces from your rooftops, from your driveways, and your compacted lawns. And so this is a really, really great way to both help prevent pollution, primarily phosphorus, from entering our water bodies, and also provide pollinator habitat. And so they certainly do require a little bit more work and a little bit more specialized understanding of them. In the next slide, you'll see kind of a typical cross section of a rain garden. And in this, you'll see that the bottom basin is flat. And this is one of the most commonly made mistakes by do-it-yourselfers, especially if you've got like a yard that's like 5, 8% slope. Well, it might appear to be flat. It's not. And the reason for that is if there's suspended solids that are in the water coming into a rain garden, those settle out at the lowest point where there's the least amount of energy. And so your rain garden could clog if you've got one lower spot than the other. So if you have a perfectly flat bottom, then your stormwater will infiltrate, soak into the ground evenly and efficiently, and it'll function for a long, long time. And that's what we want. We want these rain gardens to be dry within 48 hours after a rain event. And that's for a number of reasons. But the plants that we choose in them, even the ones in the bottom that can handle wet feet, they're also drought tolerant. But the other reason is we don't want a mosquito breeding ground. A lot of people feel that or think that rain gardens are ponds and that they will result in more mosquitoes, and we don't want that. Well, that's not true. If they're designed properly, then they will be dry within 48 hours. You're going to want to keep a rain garden at least 10 feet away from your basement, ideally 15 if you've got the space. You don't want to concentrate stormwater from like a downspout and then have that go into your basement. So that's the last thing you want to do. So you want to capture that runoff safely and allow it to soak in. I mentioned trees. And so when you're doing your base map, draw where that canopy extent is of the drip, what we also call the drip line of the tree. And obviously, the closer to the trunk, the bigger the roots are going to be. And it's not to say that you can't put a rain garden underneath a tree, and sometimes you don't have a whole lot of choices. But just knowing that you're going to be dealing with roots, and a lot of times, especially if there's trees that aren't mature yet, I'll put a rain garden right on the edge of that drip line, which is, of course, curved. So it'll be kind of a kidney shaped rain garden. And that's a pretty common practice. But yeah, there's lots of different ways of doing it. And it's a wonderful, wonderful thing to have in your landscape. And like I was mentioning before, if you have a large, large yard and you think that most of that runoff is being absorbed into the ground, well, here's another thing about rain gardens. So we're choosing those plants with wet feet on the base and bottom, and then the medium moisture plants on the side slopes, and then the dry plants above on the top and beyond. And so rain gardens kind of set up a multiple moisture regime in your yard. So then you can choose more plants and add more biodiversity in your landscape to match those conditions. And so it is a wonderful way to start adding more plants that you may not have thought of prior to putting in a rain garden. The last thing that well, there's a few more pieces here, but I'm looking at the things to consider, and always call Gopher State 1, like I mentioned. You can put a rain garden on top of a water line or a sanitary sewer. Those are below frost, and that's not a big deal. Just know that if you have any problems with those utilities, they might have to come and dig it all up, right? And then you're going to have to redo your rain garden again in some areas. But also gas lines, they're usually 18 inches or deeper. So it's okay to put it over that. The last point here is when we install rain gardens, we uncompact the soil, add compost like Jen had already mentioned, and we use double shredded hardwood mulch. And that's the only type of mulch that I would recommend for rain gardens is double shredded hardwood mulch. It's fibrous and it binds together, and it's less likely to wash out and float away. If you use wood chips, then they'll float and they might wash out, and or they'll settle to the bottom and they'll move around on you. So if you're more interested in this, I'd highly recommend utilizing the online free training on the Blue Thumb. There's some great videos on rain gardens, and also download the resource for resilient yards. There's a resilient yards PDF on the do-it-yourself section, and that has some more information on rain gardens. Okay. Pollinator meadows, that is a larger version of a pocket planting. And so isn't this picture just beautiful? Look at the biodiversity in that landscape. It's just lovely. And so, that's what we're after all. And so if you move to the next slide, we'll go over some of the things that you want to consider with this work. They're just more expansive areas. And, you could do your first pocket planting and then do another one and keep adding to it as you have resources and time. And so the other method is to go and just do it all at once. And that gets kind of pricey if you're going to use plugs. You can seed, Twin Cities Seed and other Blue Thumb partners have great seed for this type of work. Prairie Restoration and others, Minnesota Native Landscapes. They're all wonderful, and they have great seed mixes for these types of projects. One resource that I would highly recommend that you check out is the Xerxes Society has a wonderful document on site prepping for organic meadows or wildflower establishment. And I'll post a link to that if we can't, if it's not posted already. But anyway, you want to check with your seed supplier for your native seeds and what they have available. different methods of sheet mulching and solarizing to site prep, that works a little bit better if you have more time. And that's a great way to go. You solarize it for the summer, you kill everything with plastic, and then the next year, then you can go in and you can seed it. I find that to be a very successful way. But remember, you're going to need to weed it and you're going to need to water it to get it established. And so, don't take on more than you can chew. But this is a wonderful way to add more pollinator habitat to your property. Okay. Jen.
Sorry. I was looking up some info to answer a couple of questions in the chat later, which will be fun. One of the reasons we're going to talk about trees, one of the kind of ways that you can use your lawns to legumes reimbursement is through the use of trees and shrubs. And I will say that trees and shrubs can be really, really helpful, especially if you're looking to make this new project lower maintenance. So that's a question that I get fairly frequently is, I need my yard to be low maintenance. I have to say, as a landscape architect and designer, nobody's ever asked me for a high maintenance yard. So that's a fairly common question, is that folks are looking for ways to make it low maintenance. And trees and shrubs are a great way to do that. We're going to talk through some of the pollinator benefits, and then also kind of just thinking about what that means to maintain your yard. So let's go ahead and move into this section. Before we start talking about what's really helpful and which native trees and shrubs would do well, let's just talk about placing them and siting them. Kind of the basis of this presentation is helping you plan out your project. And one of the things that are really important is that if you are looking to place trees and shrubs, especially trees, they are a long-term investment. And where you put your tree in your yard is going to have an impact 20, 30, 100 years down the road. So you want to make sure you find the right place. So you really want to consider your sunlight conditions, and those might change over time, right? So what is a sunny area now? If you have a tree that is growing, that's going to become shady in a few years. So consider those sun conditions and picking the right tree for the right place. This is where it is really important to have your utilities marked, and we have that Go for State One Call website here, because you don't want to plant a tree over a utility line, especially if 20 years down the road it's over your sanitary sewer line that's leaving your house and you have to get that replaced because you have a clog. It's a real bummer to have to dig up your 20-year-old tree at that point. So have your utility lines marked and really try to stay about 10 feet away from those utilities so that that tree has space to grow and you're not setting it up for failure when you might have to repair some of those utilities down the road. Also, don't forget to look up. There might be power lines up overhead, especially lines coming from your house to your garage or to the alley or to the street. And you want to make sure you're not interfering with those, or they will then be trimmed poorly later if they're, interfering with those power lines. Also consider things like buildings. Don't put them too close to a building. Don't put them too close to walkways and views and privacy. So just a lot to consider, but I will say it's a really wonderful investment. And there's that saying, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. So go ahead and think about now, especially if you have just one species of tree in your yard, starting to add diversity of tree species so that over time, if those trees become impacted, then you have the ability to have that diversity of tree species in your yard that can really withstand a variety of challenges. This just goes into a little bit more detail about utility markings because we really can't stress enough how important it is to have these marked before determining where you're going to place your new trees. Again, if you have your public utilities will be marked by Go for State One Call. So that's kind of shows here what all of those different colors mean. One of the more important ones is really yellow. Those are your gas lines. Obviously, nobody wants to hit a gas line. And they're maybe also shallower than, say, your water and sewer lines. So something to be aware of. There are a lot of more communications or telecom lines now. Those are often fairly shallow and not in any conduit. So they often don't have a lot of protection and are easy to damage. If you have sprinkler systems or electric dog fencing, That one gets damaged a lot. Those things are not going to be marked because they're not public utilities. So it's really good for you to do a little investigation as to where those might be. And as I said before, you really want to stay 10 feet away from those buried lines. So you can, it's like a puzzle. You can get all your utilities marked and then really find the best place to put that new tree. We're going to go through this little animation to kind of talk about finding the right plants for the right place in your yard. And this is back to that initial drawing that we had, that initial base map. So as we click through this, you'll start to see places to consider. So if you're thinking about adding a new shade tree, well, think about doing that on the west side of your house. That's really going to help cool your house during those kind of hot afternoons. So that's going to provide west-facing shade, which can be really helpful this time of year. But it also leaves the south side of your house available for sunlight, because we are really more of a heating environment. We have than a cooling environment still. So we do have some long winters in Minnesota, and it is very nice to be able to have some of that sunlight in your house from south facing areas in the wintertime. So put that shade tree on the west side. If you're thinking about adding a rain garden, oh yeah, we have that little animation of the sun showing you what that means, what that looks like. If you are thinking about adding a rain garden and you've kind of gone through the steps of that, but you want to still add a tree, a serviceberry is a great native species that can handle the mesic soils of rain gardens. So adding a serviceberry to your rain garden can be really helpful location for that particular tree. We show that one here. If you are looking to provide some screening, maybe you want a little bit of privacy, then think about selecting maybe an upright, a columnar shrub. There's some great black chokeberries are a really lovely native species that can help provide some screening if that's something you're looking to do. I also think it's really helpful to place shrubs as a way to really frame your yard along your back fence, something against your garage. They can really help kind of soften and define a space and provide the backdrop, say, for native perennials to be in front of them. And then finally, the prevailing winter winds in our areas are coming from the northwest. So evergreens can really help block that prevailing winter wind. So if you have a particular area that you're looking to for a little bit of kind of refuge from that in the winter, consider placing an evergreen northwest of that for a little way to block that prevailing northwest winter wind. Now, there are a few things for you to know about tree planting that are very, very important. I cannot stress these enough. It is really important to plant your trees correctly. If you plant your trees too deeply, or if they have circling roots, that is a problem that does not manifest for about 20 years. So 20 years down the road, you can have a tree that really isn't going to survive because of some mistakes that were made during the tree planting. So what's really important is that you do not plant a tree too deeply. You actually do not want to dig a hole any deeper than the tree is in the pot. You want to dig it wider because you want those roots to go wide. Also, one of the things I would advise you to do, you can see on this picture on the right, that's kind of what a tree looks like when you might buy it from a nursery. Find the root flare. So at the base where this tree meets the soil in the pot, that might be buried in the pot too deeply. And I actually see that fairly commonly. You want to pull the soil away from the tree until the root flare is exposed. Root flare is just the point at which, if you look at a tree in nature, it starts to flare out when it hits the soil. And that should be at the soil level, it would be slightly exposed. If you bury it, then that can cause circling roots later on to then really strangle that tree. If your tree has been in a pot for too long, and it has roots circling the outside of it when you pull it out, you actually want to completely cut those off. We call that box cutting, and you can use a handsaw to do that, as we show here in the picture on the bottom left. There is some resistance. Folks think that they are hurting the tree, and really what is going to help is that's going to help prevent those roots from continuing to grow in a circle, which they will do if you just plant it straight into the soil. They'll get bigger and bigger, and they will eventually strangle the tree. So you really want to remove those circling roots. If you don't use a saw to box cut it, then you just want to pull the roots out really, really, really well to straighten them and make sure that they're not circling when you put it into the soil. again, that hole can be wider, but what you don't want to do is dig a really deep hole that tends to settle over time, and then the tree just kind of gets deeper and deeper. So you can dig a wide hole to give those roots some loose soil to begin to get established in. And then you want to firmly backfill the hole. So after you've got all this set, your tree is placed in there, just like we show here on the right. Then you sort of want to use that loosened soil to backfill in and around that root ball to make sure that your tree, and make sure your tree is straight and gives you like a nice firm soil to settle in there. And then we'll talk next about making sure you mulch it correctly. So mulch is really helpful when you're planting a new tree. It kind of prevents you from, cutting the tree with the mower, running into it, or damaging the bark. And it gives you that ring around it to help protect that tree. Trees do really want to grow in mulch more than in turf. And so it keeps that kind of maintenance equipment away from the base of the tree. It also, just as with all of our other plantings, helps hold in moisture and aid in the tree establishment. But one thing we see a lot are what we call mulch volcanoes. In this little illustration on the bottom right, mulch volcano is just like what it sounds like. It's really when the mulch is piled up against the trunk of the tree. That allows insects in the mulch to actually begin to burrow into the bark of the tree, and that is really damaging for a tree down the way. And so don't mulch volcano. That's not good. What you want to do is consider making a mulch donut. So think donuts, they're delicious. Let's make some donuts around our trees. You can think about how positive donuts are. Donuts good, volcanoes bad. So a mulch donut really allows that root flare of the tree to be visible to make sure that that's not being strangled. And this picture on the bottom left is wonderful. You can really see the root flare of that tree. And so it's not, there's no mulch piled up against the base, up against the trunk of the tree. And that's really helpful. I think I touched on all of my tree planting requirements. One thing I will say for trees is they need just a little bit of water for a long period of time. So you can just set your hose onto trickle and let it run for an hour to really let that water soak deeply. If your tree is only getting watered 5 minutes a day from a sprinkler, it's really not going to get established well. You want some slow, long watering to help those roots get deep and get established really well. There are so many wonderful native trees and shrubs, and the Xerxes Society has a great resource on how many of our native insects, pollinators use these species as a host. So you can see here, red maple, there are 226 insect species that use red maple as a host tree. Willows, the bottom right, 355. I think that is the top. It could be cottonwood. Rich, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Which one supports the most native pollinators? I know you remember.
Well, I know that oaks is the highest,
Got
and
it.
cherry, prunus
Yeah,
is also the second highest.
yeah,
But
great.
I love willows personally because willows also produce really, really awesome high protein pollen for those first emerging bumblebees.
And that's what we have a picture of here, right on the bottom right of this slide is some willow flowers with bumblebees on there, with bees on there as well. So you can think about that pollinator benefit in using trees and shrubs. That's why this is a great way if you are, again, looking for a low maintenance way to implement trees and shrubs with your Lawns to Legumes grant. This is a great way to do that. Service berries, really, they can come in tree or shrub form. Those are wonderful. Black chokeberries, dwarf bush honeysuckle is a great native shrub that I highly recommend. Very low maintenance, really resilient to rabbit damage. It's a great species as well. So it's a really great list to start from, and a great way to add that diversity into your yard.
Awesome. I love trees. Okay, well, let's talk. This last section that I'm going to talk about is caring for your native plants. And let's just jump right into the first year establishment. And Jen has already mentioned about watering trees. And the same method is true for watering any of your shrubs and perennials. And that is watering long and deep and slow and let that soak in so that those plants are forced to chase those chase that water down deep and they get established a lot faster. So we do recommend watering at least 1 inch per week, if of course it doesn't come from the sky, and we don't seem to be having that problem right now. But you never know when that tap is going to turn off up there. It's like we could just get, 3, 4 weeks or even a month and a half without rain. And so when it's not raining, then go ahead and do that. And of course, pulling weeds is the other activity, and this is going to be on repeat as we go through the process. But I like to try to, encourage people to get out there at least once per week in the very beginning, and get a handle of what's coming up. It all depends on kind of mulch you use and how well you prep the site. But sometimes if you disturb the seed bank, that's all these annual seeds and noxious seeds that got pulled up to the top, then they might start germinating and pushing through. And so you might have a little bit of work cut out for you in the beginning, until that seed bank is depleted. But don't be discouraged, because the whole point of weeding, and a weed is just a plant that doesn't belong, and sometimes it might actually be a volunteer tree that, of a maple or one of those great species that Jen had mentioned in the previous slide. But we don't want that growing, especially next to your house or along a fence, or even in your rain garden or next to some of the plants that you want to get established. And so these weeds are taking nutrients and moisture away from the intentional plants, and they're stunting their growth and preventing them from getting established. So it's really, really critical that you pay attention to where those new plants are planted, and if anything else is growing right next to it, out it goes. Okay. Next step. So let's go back to watering. When is the best time to water? I encourage you to do it early in the morning before it gets too hot, before you have a lot of direct sunlight. You don't want all that water to just evaporate. And again, it's better to water long, just a couple days a week instead of every 5 minutes. And so the next slide here will show you a good way to measure that. You can put out a little pot or like a tuna fish can out into the yard even, but around a sprinkler. Put out your sprinkler, turn it on for half an hour. You want to use something that has straight walls. You don't want to put out like your cereal bowl that has graduated walls, as that won't be a good measurement of how much rain is, or how much the sprinkler is watering your plants. So, yeah, you can turn on a sprinkler half an hour, and if it's about a half an inch, then you can do that about twice a week. It's just a general way to making sure. You might want to go a little bit more in the beginning, and again, let it soak in. One other thing is you can do the old thumb test, and you can put your thumb into the mulch, and if it's bone dry, you got to water, right? So that's another simple way to know when you need to water. Okay, so weeding. This is probably one of the biggest challenges to getting a yard established, getting a resilient yard established. And it's like identifying weeds. Like, is this a weed? Is this a weed? I don't know. They're so small, I can't identify it yet. And that's one of the benefits of planting like 18 inches or 12 inches on center. I've even seen projects where people have used popsicle sticks or even like twigs to identify where those plants are, and exactly where they are, and if something else is growing up next to it, out it goes. But another thing, I would encourage everyone to take advantage of these online apps for your phones. I used to use iNaturalist Seek quite often, and I just uploaded or downloaded the picture of this app, and that works really good. And these apps are getting better and better, I think, due to AI, I suppose. And they're really, really something else. And you just take a picture of that plant, and sometimes you might have to go around and get at different angles, but hopefully it'll tell you what it is. And this is also really useful if you're kind of new and maybe you moved into a new house, or you're just not sure what you got in your yard to begin with. And so using these apps are fantastic. There's other resources. Minnesota Wildflowers is a nonprofit website that has great information about plants. And this is my other word of advice for ID is I would use more than one app on the phone sometimes, especially if it's like not sure. And then I use voice command on my phone and I'll be like, I'll say the name of the plant and then Minnesota wildflowers, and they'll look that up. And then that has other photographs at different stages of growth and the seeds, the leaves, and like trees, it'll show bark and other patterns. And so of, opposite or alternate leaf patterns and things like that. So getting to know your plants, and it's really, really fun. And then you can show off to your friends afterwards. So that's pretty cool. You can tell them what they got. Okay. This is a really wonderful diagram about making sure that you're pulling those tree seedlings, especially when they're small. This is Siberian elm on the left. It's a little seedling, and that'll be very easy to pull out with your hands. The one in the middle, I think that's probably a year to probably about a 2-year old tree seedling, and we needed to use a root wrench to get that out. I was out doing some training at a commercial site on that day. Another method is to use a garden shovel and then put that shovel right down parallel next to the base of the tree, loosen up that soil around it, and then you can give it a good heave ho and deadlift it right out of the ground. It's best to grab the trunk or the stem as close to the soil as possible when weeding. Another word of advice is, and it's been great lately because we've gotten all this rain. So weed after a really good soaking rain that loosens up the soil, it softens it all up, and it makes weeding so much easier. But please don't neglect those trees, those volunteer trees that are coming in, and because then you're going to have a situation on the right, and it's going to be very difficult to get that tree out. Okay. Um, it takes a good 3 years for these native plants to get established. And this is an example of second year growth. And we already have really beautiful blooms. The one on the right is a little bit more of a shady garden, and the one on the left is a sunny garden. And obviously, we do know that we get more prolific blooms in the sun. But regardless, this is second year growth, and you're going to see there's no weeds in between those plants, and we do have a healthy layer of mulch in between them. So you can move to the next slide. And the third year and beyond, and again, this is just a repeat, weeding and watering, weeding and watering. And I'll talk about replacing plants, I think, in an upcoming slide. But isn't this beautiful? I mean, you're really starting to appreciate all of these blooms in mass and seeing what it can be here. These pictures are here to inspire you. And also don't be discouraged throughout this time. The one thing that does happen also is plants just don't survive sometimes. We probably get on average like 10% mortality on our projects. Sometimes plants just don't make it. And so if that happens, then, be sure to replace it. Or at the very least, make sure you put some mulch down where that is and don't have bare soil. So I think the next slide talks about that. Yeah, again, weeding and watering. Once you get past that third year or into the second, third year, just try to make sure and get out there during the major holidays. This is a really easy way to remember Memorial Day, 4th of July, and Labor Day. We're in between those two holidays right now. Those are really, really good cues to come out and do some weeding around those holiday periods of time. Okay. Mulching. So Why do we use mulch to begin with? Ask yourself that question. And the answer is to keep moisture in the soil, so that when you give it a good soaking, it doesn't evaporate or run off, wash away. And so it soaks in so these plants can get established. Another reason is to suppress weeds and cover up that seed bank. And when we do new projects, we try to put 2 to 3 inches of mulch. And again, we use double shredded mulch. I see some talk about mulch or chip drop, and that's a great affordable way to get mulch. Just knowing that wood chips, um, they're a little bit. Well, first off, you're going to get a huge volume, so be prepared to move some mulch or get some friends to use it as well. But there's some other issues, and I think we'll have a conversation at the very end, maybe more about mulch. But in this case, let's stay on this. In this case, I still wanted to um, address, usually once a year, I'll put mulch down, but now you don't have to mulch all the time. And really, it's to cover the bare soil. And adding a fresh layer of mulch certainly makes your landscape beds look a little tidier, but you do not need to constantly add more and more mulch. Vegetative cover is what we're looking for. That's the best case scenario, having vegetation that covers the ground, and bare soil is the worst case scenario. The raindrop is very powerful and it'll erode the soil and it'll compact the soil. So if you have bare soil because you've pulled some weeds or a plant didn't survive, or you've got erosion from concentrated stormwater, you want to make sure that you get mulch down. And if you have a situation where you've got concentrated stormwater that's blowing through your planting bed and washing mulch away, then I would really encourage you to add some rock in those places, especially in rain gardens when the inlets and outlets are overflows. Then we use rock. So you'll want to inspect your landscapes, especially after a really big rain event like we're having these days, and trying to make sure that it's not washing away. Okay. Dividing and transplanting. So, native plants don't need to be divided as much as some of the cultivars. And I think of like irises, and lilies. And it's like, once they have been growing in a spot in hostas, they start to like just get so root bound and compact they're just not blooming anymore, and that might be a reason to divide. But also, I want to talk about a term that I like to use: editing your landscape. A lot of these native plants sometimes can be a little bit aggressive. I'm not going to lie. If you have obedient plant or even Monarda, the bee balm. I was at a maintenance training the other day, and bee balm just completely took over the city park rain garden, and I was just surprised. But it just really loved the conditions, and I'm like, well, this might be a good opportunity for them to remove some of those big massings along the edges, and then they could divide it up and give it away to people who want it. That's a great way to do it. And so you don't want to do this in the hottest days of the year. So we're in it right now. We're in the dog days of summer, they say, and it is hot. And if you try to divide and transplant right now, you're going to be in for it. You need to make sure that you water it probably more frequently. These plants are going to be stressed out. So the best time to do this is in the fall and in the spring. And yeah, so that's a cool thing to do. You can share them with your friends. Another issue that we're coming across is jumping worms. And I do want to mention this. If you've got areas of bare turf, and if you see these, it's not the regular earthworms that we're used to. There's another one called jumping worms. And if you're interested in looking that up, there's some really good research by wild ones and others. But if you suspect you might have this problem, it's advisable to wash the dirt off the roots when you divide and then wrap it in newspaper and then get it wet and then give it to your friends and have them put in, or whomever is going to be taking that plant, and then get it into the ground as soon as possible. So by washing those roots, that's washing off any egg casings from the jumping worms, and that's a good thing. One other thing I want to mention on this is there is a Facebook group, and I just took advantage of it this spring. I think it's called Twins. If you're in the Twin Cities, I think it's Twin Cities Perennial Exchange. But I posted on that I had some extra. I had some big blue stem, and the big blue stem was just kind of spreading, and it was in areas in my garden that I wanted to remove. And so I was able to give away the big blue stem and some other species. And so, other people that are starting out, they might want what you have, and vice versa. You might want what other people have. So it's a great way to build community and add more biodiversity to your landscapes. And like if you have that situation where one species is really starting to dominate, don't be afraid to edit it and take those out and then add more biodiversity of other species. Um, yeah, well, let's move on to the next one, and I have another really important point to cover here, but we're learning more and more and more about the habitat of bees. There are over 400 native bees in the state of Minnesota, and a lot of them are stem nesting bees. And so what that means is they'll literally mine or dig the pith out of the stem, and then they'll lay their eggs, they'll put in some pollen balls, more eggs, pollen balls on up the stem. And so for that reason, we recommend when you do cut back your plants, leaving them 18 inches high, so that these stem nesting bees can take advantage of those standing stems and make a home for their young. Um, the other part is in the spring, I want to encourage you to wait and be patient. Just relax, right? I know you want to get out in the yard and you want to get out raking and you want to get out and cutting everything down. And it's like, it's just too early. We encourage you to wait until the temperature is average 50 degrees. And that is actually soil temperature. A good sign of this is when the dandelions start to bloom. And so once the dandelions start to bloom, then it's okay to start getting out and doing some yard work. Um, so in the fall, I really encourage people to leave their plants up. But if you are going to cut them down, again, cut them down at 18 inches above ground. I like to cut my plants down in the spring, unless it's just really looking like a mess. And let's challenge our perceptions a little bit, folks. Native plants sometimes look a little messy, and that is okay. In fact, a messy yard is often it's the healthiest yards. But we've been conditioned and trained to have really tidy yards, and we want to make it look neat. But you know, some of those plants, I encourage you to leave through the winter. The purple coneflower, for example, really has a nice rigid structure, and it is beautiful in the winter when you get the little hats of snow that's just piling up on top of the seed head. They're beautiful, and the shadows that they cast. But also, birds that winter here will come and they'll feed on the seeds, and they need that food source. So they'll eat those seeds of those plants that you leave up over the winter time. So yeah, it's really great to learn more and more how to better care for your landscapes. Don't be afraid to just leave it a little messy. Okay.
Hey, Rich,
Yeah.
I'm going to jump into us with a time check. We've got about 5 minutes left. I want to make sure we leave some time for questions. So
All
just
right.
keep that in mind for the last couple slides.
Well, we have a couple slides left, so thank you for the time check. Here's the winter time. Oh my gosh, leave those plants in the winter and enjoy the beauty. I was at a Wild Ones conference, Design with Nature conference many years ago, and the presenter said, "How many shades of brown are there?" And I'm like, I don't know. That's an interesting question. But you find a lot of beauty and awe-inspiring landscapes when these plants are sticking out through the snow. So just again, to recap exactly what I was talking about, think about those holly pithy stems for those stem nesting bees. And 30% of those 400 plus bees are stem nesting bees in the state of Minnesota. And if you choose to cut it back, leave them 18 inches high. But wait until it's 50 degrees consistently when the dandelions start to bloom. Some species of pithy stems are like bee balm and cup plant. Oh man, I love cup plant. It's a big square stem. It's almost a half an inch wide, and it's super, super cool. Check it out. All right. Um, the last thing I want to mention here is the whole Leave the Leaves campaign. And this has been probably it's been very popular or talked about the last few years in social media, and for a good reason. There is so much life in the leaves. And, when I was a kid, we raked them up, we put them in a big pile, and we jumped in them with the dog, and I had a lot of fun. I have very fond memories. You can still do that. But, bagging them up and then, having the city or whomever taking them away to compost them, you might be sending a lot of beautiful moths to their demise. And the same goes for the mulching lawnmowers. And I understand, the reason for doing that because that's adding more nutrients and fertilizer to your lawn. And, if you're going to do that, just don't do it to all of them. You might want to think about raking some of them into your landscape beds. What I recommend is to really look at your overall landscape. And this is a good time to visualize what your yard could be. You could rake those paths that you're going to walk through. You can rake it into those future landscape beds and visualize where those future pollinator gardens are going to be with the leaves. And then once you actually have the landscapes, you can rake your leaves right into your gardens. I leave a good 2 to 3 inches, up to 5, 6 inches of leaves in my gardens. They decompose, they go back to the soil, and all the life that's in them gets saved. So please consider leaving the leaves. So we've got some resources that Megan's going to talk about.
Yeah, thank you, Rich. We covered a lot of these already in the kickoff webinar, but just a reminder, bluethumb.org is really a hub for a lot of the resources that we've been talking about tonight. We have the grantee guide as that central place that outlines the process for completing your project and requesting reimbursement. And that also has in there our eligible expenses guide and our native plant nurseries list. So I recommend visiting those if you haven't yet already. And then all of the design templates and some of the other guides that were mentioned are on our resources page, which is under the Learn tab on the Blue Thumb website. We also have just some like DIY step-by-step guides of our different project types on the Plan a Project page if you want to have like a quick review of what we covered tonight. And of course, we have the Hive space. The link for that has been in a lot of the emails that we've been sending out to you. And this is a community forum, kind of like Facebook, where you can post just updates on your project or any questions that you have. And it's a great way to connect with other grantees that might be in your area. So with our remaining few minutes, I think we have some remaining questions to be answered. Thank you to our staff who have been already answering questions in the chat. I'm gonna highlight Amy's question, and they say that they're having a hard time determining if their soil is wet or dry. It's sandy and loamy, so it dries out at the surface quickly, but it's in the northern wetland region of Minnesota. I'm wondering, Jen and Rich, if you have any thoughts on assessing their soil type.
Sure. Rich, you ready? I'm happy to jump in.
Well, I was just going to say, I would definitely recommend digging down, like 6 to 9 inches and checking it out at that depth. that would probably be a good indication of the moisture of the soil. That's my first thought. Jen?
Yeah, same. I would just say your soil is somewhat site specific. So you may be in the northern wetland region, but if your soil is sandy and loamy and you're not seeing standing water, it's infiltrating really well. And you dig down after a rain event. So say if you get some rain this evening and you dig down this evening or excuse me, tomorrow, and it's not holding water, then I'd say you've got well-drained soil. I think that we tend to see clayey soil will tend to really hold on to moisture. Or if you're just in like a low spot for your overall area or neighborhood or region, those sometimes can be wet spots. So kind of dig in that soil at different times, both before and after a rain event, and that'll really help you determine that. If it doesn't seem wet soil that's really holding a lot of water, it doesn't smell very good. It has a that kind of icky smell that it's just because it's anaerobic, it doesn't have oxygen in it. So if your soil smells rich and it smells good and you're, digging that soil and it doesn't have standing water, it's not sopping wet, I think you're good to go and you've got well-drained soil.
Thank you. So Karen from Bemidji shared that Bemidji is offering a lot of free mulch from their unfortunate tree losses, and wondering if she could take advantage of that for mulch. So I know we've talked a lot about shredded mulch and multiple types. I'm not sure what the Bemidji one is like.
Sure. Yeah. So the issue with mulch that is freshly chipped is that it can tie up nitrogen within the soil. There's a lot of carbon in that fresh mulch. And as it's beginning to decompose, a lot of soil microorganisms will start to like eat it. And it can really tie up nitrogen in your soil and deplete kind of like the naturally existing nitrogen in your soil that your new plants will feed on and use, as a nutrient. That is one of the reasons we don't often recommend freshly chipped mulch. It is a great, it's definitely a free resource, and that is very helpful. If you can, if you can let a mulch pile sit for a year or two, well, then it ages, and then you don't have that problem. It kind of like decomposes a little bit. It's just that very, very fresh mulch can tie up some nitrogen in the soil, and that's one of our bigger concerns about using that. Again, it can often be like chipped looking instead of shredded. And if it is something that you're planning to use in a rain garden or somewhere where you have water flowing across it, my only concern is that the chipped mulch tends to float away and won't stay in place like a shredded type of mulch. So it's really specific to your particular project, and you can determine based on your project what you what type of mulch you want to use.
Great, thanks. I think we'll do one last question. Dan is thinking about a possible replacement for their green ash wood trees from emerald ash borer. And maybe if you could talk a little bit about if somebody's thinking about a tree replacement, where should they start in terms of considering what tree species to select?
Sure. Do you, Rich, you have any ideas off the top of your head? I'm happy to talk.
Well, yeah, I mean, well, first off, the DNR has a great website that talks, it depends on what part of the state you're in. And looking at trees that are good for climate resiliency, or maybe there's another website that I'm mixing it up with climate resilient trees, because they just reclassified the USDA planting zones a couple years ago. It is getting warmer the further you get north, so those zones are changing. And also here in Minneapolis, like they're recommending not planting maples because we have a lot of maples, and so we're trying to diversify our tree species. So there are some hybrid elms now that are resistant to the Dutch elm disease, and oaks, of course, are wonderful. There's a lot of different great choices of different varieties of oak trees, but Kentucky coffee trees and the honey locust, hackberries, are all just wonderful species. I want to put a catalpa tree in my yard. I just love on those big elephant ear leaves and the beautiful white flowers in the summer. But you know, there's some good resources also. And Jen, you
Yeah,
probably
we just put a couple in the chat. So I know Alexandra put one in there, and then we also put the DNR's link to that you were mentioning, Rich, to trees for a
yeah.
changing climate. They really do have that based on our eco regions, and I'd say that's a really great place to start. And like you said, Rich, also just look at what's in your area. So if you have, you know, a ton of one particular species in your area, you really want to think about adding that diversity so that if for some reason, you know, there is something that impacts maples, as Rich mentioned, then you're not going to end up with, you know, a tree that's impacted by, you know, something similar to the emerald ash borer. So think about diversity for sure.
Yeah, and Dan, I see you want to plant black walnut, and I'd say go for it. Just know that black walnuts, they do change the chemistry of the soil. They have allelopathic chemical or characteristics, and so once that tree matures, you're going to have more limited plant palette of what will survive underneath it. But there's still some wonderful plants that you can choose that will grow underneath walnuts.
Ditto that. I totally agree.
Well, thank you, Jen and Rich, for sharing your knowledge with us this evening, and thank you everybody for attending. Um, we'll be sending out a newsletter next week, so keep an eye out for that. Earlier this afternoon, we sent out a coach request survey if you're interested in being matched with a volunteer coach. And if you have any follow-up questions, you can email us at the L2L helpline, which I put in the chat there, and it's also on our grantee guide if you need that email. Otherwise, I wish you best of luck on planning your projects, and I hope you all have a good evening. Thank you.